everyone. My name is Kathleen McClung. I'm the Associate Director of the Soul Making Keats Literary Competition. I'm thrilled to have you all with me today on Zoom and eventually on YouTube to celebrate the winners of a number of categories of the Soul Making Keats competition. I want to thank the members of the Zoom team that came together over the last few months to put together this production. First, I want to thank Steve, who has been our tech wizard. So thank you so much, Steve. I also want to thank Ellen Woods and Angie Minkin, who are our event co-chairs. And lastly, I want to thank Eileen Malone, who is the contest founder and director. And Eileen is going to say a few words about the contest, a little bit about the history of the contest, and then we will proceed with our awards reading. So Eileen, please unmute and share with us a little bit about the contest.
Thank you. We founded this contest or this competition in 1992, and it was just a poetry contest. That's it, sponsored by San Francisco Bay Area spiritual directors. And originally it was just soul making. And then we added Keats because after Keats died, the three words used to characterize him are the three words that we use to characterize our competition, which is open-minded, generous, and sincere. You're going to get all of that when you enter into this contest. You're also going to be able to, or were able, and will always be able, to enter in most categories previously published works. That's very unusual for a competition, even just for submitting. We have the lowest entry fees ever. We will probably do both. We will probably have the awards reading at the Corvette, which we've been doing for years, the Corvette Auditorium, San Francisco Main Library, and a Zoom reading, because we've discovered so many people live so far away, they have disabilities, it's difficult for them to come out here, and this way they get to actually go face to face with their fellow colleagues and listen to their in real life reading. Keats said, some say the world is a vale of tears. I say it's a place of soul making, and we love it when you stretch that as far as you can, so that your interpretation of soul making becomes known to us, and we can experience it with you. Our judges are all over the nation, as you'll find out, and they all look for original, freshly creative, and finely crafted works that embrace all creative interpretations. So you will find that all of your works are so different from all of the other works, and that's what we like. We're not academia. We don't favor a particular kind of voice. We go for the gut. And when you get us in the gut, our judges will award you for that. So, onward.
Thank you very much, Eileen. What I'll be doing is I'll introduce the judge for each category, and the judge will say a few words about her category, and then the judge will introduce the names of the honorable mention recipients and the three award winners in each category. We needed to make an executive decision as part of the team that we would have time only to hear the first, second, and third prize winners in each category. Otherwise, as I said earlier, we would be here until midnight listening to all the beautiful work that has been submitted. You can certainly go to our website and see the names and the cities where all of our honorable mentions and winners live, and see their titles of their pieces. So first, I'd like to introduce to you Lizette Wanzer, who is the judge of the intercultural essay category. and Lizette will then introduce her winners. Lizette, welcome.
I would like to say that I truly enjoyed reading the entries in my intercultural essay category. And I look forward to these writers reading excerpts of their work, and especially to getting to hear these essay excerpts in their own voices. So as I've said before on the categories webpage, I'm partial to writing that is muscular, freighted, and that counters the conventional, while displaying a clean and even voice in the meat of each piece. I also liked these particular entries because they express the author's flair and appetite for expression. So the prize winners for this category are as follows. The third prize winner is Grace Seagram of Belmont, Massachusetts, and her essay was called An Illicit Affair. The second prize winner is David Stewart of Palo Alto, California, and his essay is called Man at the Margins. And the first prize winner is Edward Corpus of Pacific Grove, California, and he will be reading from his essay, The Connie in the Mirror. Take it away.
Well, thank you very much. It's nice to be here, and thanks to everyone who organized today. I'm going to read an excerpt, as discussed, from my piece, Man at the Margins. And it's just the first 2 pages of the piece, so it starts right at the beginning. Okay, class, it's time to play Test Your Privilege, said Sylvia, my professor of cultural identity at Lesley University in Cambridge, Massachusetts, in the fall of 2000. Lesley's small campus sits just a few blocks from Harvard University. Its graduate intercultural relations program mostly attracted immigrants and cultural exiles like me, reinforcing our outsider perspectives by fostering intellectual growth in the shadow of America's premier university. Everyone to the back of the room, Sylvia called. I heard a din of scraping and shuffling as we all rose from our desks and moved to the rear wall, facing Sylvia in her baggy dress and slightly unkempt hair. I was wearing Bermuda shorts and a collared shirt, arms crossed, skeptically watching this game unfold. I'd recently sold a chunk of shares that I'd earned at a tech startup where I'd been working as a lawyer. Many of my former colleagues had already jumped into new startups, but I'd chosen to pursue this master's program instead, to take some time to explore my expat Canadian blues. All right, Sylvia concluded, peering out at our class. Here's how it's going to work. I'll call out a scenario, and if it applies to you, you'll take a step forward. Got it? I heard a scattering muttering of uh-huhs and got it's. Sylvia's grin was full Cheshire now. She was really enjoying this. Okay, she said, glancing at her crib notes. If you're white, take a step forward. I took a step. If you own a home, take a step. I took another step. If you're a man, take a step. Another step. If you're straight, take a step. Another. If you have a professional credential, take a step. Step. I glanced behind me to see what was happening in the game. A handful of my classmates hadn't budged, while some had only taken a few paces forward. Meanwhile, I was halfway across the room. I idly tapped my foot, ready for this game to end. If you have a university degree, step forward, Sylvia continued. Blah, blah, step, step. By now I'd left everyone in the dust. My nose would soon be pressed up against the blackboard. I thought about how I'd taken 2 years off work for this program to read the great cultural thinkers like Foucault and Bourdieu and reflect on my own national identity. What did this game have to do with all that? Fortunately, Sylvia finally called it off and we regrouped to talk about our feelings. I was in a foul mood though, so I didn't share much during our class debrief. My mind was racing as I rode my Razor scooter over Cambridge's bumpy brick sidewalks that evening, jiggling past giant oaks and stately manors. I couldn't put my finger on the source of my discomfort, but I was also perplexed. Having grown up as an Anglo in separatist Quebec, I had long fancied myself a cultural outsider, a view that was reinforced later when I emigrated to the US. When I started this master's program, Sylvia had asked each student to craft an essay explaining our cultural perspective. I am fundamentally a person who is away from home, I wrote. I will likely continue to view the world through the lens of a man who is a bit of an outsider. I titled the piece, Man at the Margins. But how could a man at the margins be oozing privilege? Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. And thank you for sticking to the 3-minute, which we are going to monitor very closely. If you hear a little ding, it means 3 minutes has gone by. So please bear with the 3-minute guidelines. Our first prize winner, Ed Corpus.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ed Corpus. I'm a visual artist and writer living on the California Central Coast. And my essay is entitled, The Connie in the Mirror. The word Connie refers to two things. It refers to the type of airplane that my mother and I immigrated to the United States in back in 1955, some 65 years ago. And it also refers to my mother's Americanized nickname. The writing is about the creative practice of art transcending over the challenges of ethnicity, culture clash, and the legacy of colonialism. The Connie in the Mirror. Piles of old photographs sit in a battered cardboard box. Many are scarred, faded, dog-eared, stuck together. In but another session of self-reflection, I sit at my desk berating myself for the various messes I've made in my life. I select from the piles a black and white photograph that catches my eye. A dark-haired Filipino woman of 36 years stands on an airport tarmac. A 22-month-old toddler is in her arms, face scowling. I turn it over in my hands and read the ballpoint scrawl, July 1955. Only 10 years have passed since the end of World War II as of this date, and only 2 years since the war in Korea. I am that child, the woman, my mother. The summer sun beams down on her pretty face and bare arms of light tan. Of that moment, I now have no conscious recollection, and my mother is no longer around to fill in the details. But I know we're on a stopover in Tokyo. The air is balmy and humid at that time of the year. The photographer is unknown. I'd like to imagine that photographer as some kind soul who's flown that leg of our journey, made acquaintance with my mother and me, and offered to take our picture with my mother's brownie. I imagine that he's discovered we're on our way to the United States, where my father waits for our arrival. I'd like to think that that stranger wished us well in our new home in a New York City slum. Through the years, my mother would recount to whomever would listen a story about me at the age of 3. According to her, the unmistakable image of a large airplane drawn with her red lipstick appeared on the glass of the dresser mirror. Truth be told, I have no personal recall of that incident either, though the story grew into family legend with each iteration. What would a 3-year-old know about airplanes? The aforementioned photograph provides a clue. In 1955, Northwest Orient Airlines had just placed the Lockheed L-1049G Constellations into service for the Manila to Tokyo to Seattle route, just in time for us. Apparently, the big Connies had made a big impression on me, huge and gleaming as mirrors in the sun. In hindsight, my mother's story of the lipstick airplane sounds credible. 10 years later, as a troubled adolescent, I would stare into a dresser mirror, doubting the validity of what I saw there. Now, as an adult and visual artist, I'd like to believe it's true. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Ed. Beautiful piece. Thank you. I would next like to introduce to you Mary Kennedy Eastham, who is the judge of the flash fiction category. Mary, please unmute.
Hi, everybody. Great to see all of you. I love this contest. I was a winner in this contest for 2 years running for short stories. That's how I became a judge. Have been a judge of numerous categories, now the flash fiction. I love flash fiction. I'm writing flash fiction. I'm hoping to have a book done at the end of this year, hopefully. The economy of words is very important. You got to get into the story with some sort of action and go. Sometimes to make myself even more challenged, I try to write flash pieces that are only 50 words or 100 words just to really get it in the right format that will get you great winnings and things. And that's what's been happening to me, and I'm happening to all of you today that we're going to be hearing from. I had a lot more that I wrote, but that's really, I think, the crux of what I wanted to say. There is one woman that I've taken classes with. Her name is Kathy Fish. She is like the queen of Flash. It's at Kathy Fish at Twitter. If you want to follow her, she has a free newsletter. She posts a lot of stories. I've learned so much from that. And anyway, there you have it. Okay, so here are my wonderful, and thank you in this very difficult pandemic year for all of your courageous stories. So here are my honorable mention winners. They are Reginald Best, Heather Burbeau, Francis M. Flavin, T.M. Jones, Sandra K. Cruz, I hope I pronounced that right, Margaret O'Day, T.L. Sherwood, and Gary Turchin. Great works, all of you, and I'm so sorry that we couldn't have you in this whole thing, but great works. Okay, so I would like to introduce my third prize winner, Judith and Ann Bernhard, reading from her flash piece, Mary Jane Makes Soup. Let's all welcome Judith.
Mary Jane liked to make soup. She had already known how to make many different kinds of soup when she got married, and since then, she'd taken every opportunity to search out new recipes. There was something in her that found the making of a good soup very appealing. Her husband liked to watch her make soup. He liked to eat her soups too, but his real interest was in seeing her prepare the potage, as he liked to say. If he saw her reaching for a cookbook or digging through the shoebox where she kept recipes she clipped from newspapers and magazines, he focused his attention on her. He enjoyed looking at her face as she perused the list of ingredients and the steps for producing a soup. He imagined he could read her thoughts when he saw her lift her eyebrows and purse her lips in a little half smile. He found this expression erotic, and the sight filled him with anticipation, a soft, lingering pain that was all pleasure. Mm-hmm. When Mary Jane had decided what to make, she always assembled her ingredients on the kitchen island. There was a small cutting board she favored for slicing vegetables, and when her husband saw her reach for it, he took a stool on the opposite side of the island from his wife and tried to engage her in conversation. This made her laugh. "Can't you say I'm busy?" she said. He always said something like, "I want to tell you a joke I heard the other day." Then she pretended to ignore him while he told her some dirty story he'd probably already told her. When she took her favorite knife out from a drawer, he became silent. She peeled an onion and chopped it. The knife blade banged against the wooden board as the odor of onion permeated the space between Mary Jane and her husband. She reached in the drawer again and found the vegetable peeler. She held up a big carrot for her husband's delectation before she began to slowly scrape it, leaving long orange strips in front of him on the counter. She polished a red bell pepper on her dress, taking particular care to rub it tenderly in the space between her breasts. Then she sliced off the top of the pepper and de-seeded it. When she began chopping it into little pieces, her husband's breathing slowed. By the time she held up a zucchini for him to see, He was panting. After Mary Jane added her vegetables and some broth to her pot, her husband made his desire plain by coming behind her and lifting her long hair and kissing the back of her neck. It was never very long after this step in the ritual of soup making that Mary Jane and her husband found the opportunity to reconsecrate their union. Thank you.
So glad to see you and hear you read that story. Thank you so much. Okay, my second prize winner is Daniel, let me see here, Daniel Kuo, K-U-O, and he unfortunately wasn't able to be with us. And I wish he was, because he had a very powerful story named Endings. And so now, drum roll please, here is my first place winner, Dennis Malsby, reading his story, Frozen Chosen. When I first read the story, I put on the story and read, not even a teacher, wow. The story really was wonderful. And welcome to read this wonderful story.
Frozen Chosen is a fictional account of one small episode in the winter of 1950 during the Korean War. The Marines were retreating toward the coastal city of Hungnam, where Navy transports waited. It seemed like months rather than 9 days since the withdrawal from the Chosin Reservoir. Lieutenant Tegler remembered his shock that first morning to learn a Chinese force, outnumbering them 4-1, surrounded them. Members of the Corps didn't give up. They picked up their wounded and dead and fought through the People's Volunteer Army, lashed by a bitter mountain winter that tried to destroy both friend and enemy with equal ferocity. Yesterday, he and Sergeant Davis had stumbled across a failed enemy ambush. 100 frozen Chinese dug in along a ridgeline, blue-veined marble hands still gripping rifles and machine guns. Tegler took a clumsy step. Sergeant Davis noticed. "Better let me take a look at them feet, sir. May lose them to frostbite." The sergeant glanced back, then dropped to his knees. "Jesus, sir, we got a Chinese squad on our ass." Davis unslung his carbine and pushed Tegler into the ditch at the roadside. The officer pulled the flap on his holster. It resisted, leather stiff in the 30 below zero weather. The first 2 Chinese trotted over the rise. "Damn, damn, damn," Davis cursed as his cold-locked carbine refused to fire. Tegler pulled out his GI-45. His movement slowed by layers of clothing in the cold. The enemy fired. The pistol was sheathed in ice. He blew on the spur hammer and forced it back to full cock. The Colt boomed. Pieces of ice flew off to sting his forehead like little razors. Burnt powder singed his nostrils, and the first enemy soldier dropped. Tegler felt a heavy blow against his chest. Rocking back, the gun fired at each of the Chinese in turn. It was magic. He pointed his wand, and the puppet's strings were cut. Tegler groaned. A bullet had ricocheted off the frozen ground and lodged in his left pectoral muscle. At least it didn't require a bandage. His own frozen blood sealed the wound. Where was Davis? He rolled over. The sergeant sat on his heels, hands twitching, staring, his face a shattered wooden mask. Tegler's cracked lips quivered as he realized the man's lower jaw had been completely shot off. The sergeant should be dead, but the goddamn cold had stopped the bleeding. The 45 became weightless. It lifted his arm and hand, stopping in line with Davis's heart. Tegler struggled to keep from crying. Tears would freeze his eyelashes shut and he would be blind. Many thanks to the National League of American Penwomen and Mary Kennedy Eastham for all their work.
Thank you so much. It was a beautiful, wonderful story. It really, really, really touched me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dennis and Mary. We'll now move to Tilia Klebanoff-Jacobs, who is the judge of the religious essay category. Tilia.
Thank you. Okay, can everybody hear me all right?
Yes.
Great. All right. When I first suggested a religious essay category to Eileen Malone, she responded with a lot of enthusiasm saying, "I don't think there's anything else like that out there." And it's now many years later, and I still don't know of any other literary competition with a category like ours. All too often in the public sphere, and we all know this, religion gets weaponized. Well, by contrast, the essayists who comprise this year's winners have something very special in common. Hailing from a variety of faith backgrounds, all have come to their work with an eagerness to engage, not divide, to question, not proclaim, and to include readers rather than exclude anyone. It's been a really great privilege to partake of their talent and their generosity of spirit. Our honorable mention, David Holt, wrote an essay called Return to Catechism, in which he described a spiritual journey spanning decades. Sheila Kogan, our third place winner, who is unfortunately unable to join us today, wrote The Theology of a Gluten-Free Host. It's about a woman who converted from Judaism to Catholicism and how she struggled with her faith while her son was in the ICU. And in case I didn't make this clear enough to people who might not be familiar with the category, these are essays, personal essays, so this is all nonfiction. Our second place winner is John Kevin Allen, who will now read from his essay, To Pray is to Love.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you. In the late 1980s, I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Yemen, and this excerpt describes my reaction to an imam named Mr. Nasri doing the Islamic prayer of Salah. His eyes were turned within as he offered the prayers in an Arabic that sounded like poetry. I felt his unfocused focus overtake me, and I entered a space of interior stillness. I closed my eyes and saw brief flashes of faces who said unintelligible things, maybe in English, maybe in Arabic, I didn't know. Moments from my life appeared, the sharp crunch of an apple when I was 8 at an orchard with my parents, my older brother's long brown hair, the smell of my mother's flowery Jean Matte perfume, my father's sad blue eyes when he announced he was divorcing my mother. And then one image came forward to displace them all. A tree rising out of the ground, its roots gripping the earth with terrible fierceness, its branches jutting out into the stark blue air. Leaves sprang out of those branches, followed by fruit that fell and fell onto the ground. It seemed as though that fruit would never stop falling. And as each piece hit the ground, it split open, spilling the seeds onto the welcoming earth. Mr. Nasri finished by blessing the angels on his right and his left. He knelt in the quiet, broken only by a dog's barking in the street below and a distant radio tuned to an Arabic pop station. Habibi, the man and woman crooned to each other, my love. I was only vaguely aware that Mr. Nasri had finished. The falling and bursting fruit held my attention until I realized I was crying. It was mistiness at first, and then lip quiver, and then great heaving sobs. It all came up and out, anger about my parents' divorce, uncertainty about life that was now split between parents I loved and hated for their decision to part, dark regret for having abandoned my mother to her fame, despair for being a terrible English teacher, and loneliness for being in a place where I was the only one who knew about peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. I wept and slobbered and sniffed and felt embarrassed by my tears, but these men understood. They knew this was the effect of such vulnerable and honest prayer. It called out what bottled up the spirit, and it purged it and healed it. The men handed me tissues. I honked, apologized as those men laughed gently. I looked up. Mr. Nasri offered a knowing smile that seemed to say, now you know. Thank you.
Okay, wasn't that spectacular? Thank you. Thank you, John. Okay, our first prize winner, Sherry Dwyer, will now read from her essay, Calling Me Home.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted now.
There we go.
There we go. I had a hard time picking an excerpt, so I ended up with the beginning and the end, because the rest is all so tied together, I couldn't separate it. But it's called Calling Me Home. An epiphany, one blinding flash of recognition, could make recounting a spiritual journey so simple. But this journey didn't come neatly packaged, tied with a colorful bow and left under the tree. GPS couldn't bookend this journey between a clear beginning and the parting words, "Your destination is on the right." Multiple moments were like little epiphanies popping up to shed light along the way. What GPS marked as the beginning point turned out to be the middle. What GPS said was the destination wasn't the end. This is the story of how one wanderer came to join the Catholic Church. When I opened the mailbox in mid-December of 2014, I was surprised to find a hand-addressed envelope. On a bright yellow card, the printed invitation quoted Dorothy, "There's no place like home." I was invited to the sacrament of initiation in the Catholic Church. On the back, the priest, Father Jonathan, wrote, "If you hear God calling you, I'd like to walk with you on the journey." In more than 40 years, married to a Catholic, and together raising our children into the Catholic faith, nobody had ever asked this Protestant to embrace Catholicism. I had shown no inclination to volunteer and likely would have declined if asked. The mystery was how I now came to be listening. With retirement looming, I had been trying to envision my what's next. The invitation, the spot I pegged as the journey's origin, really wasn't the beginning, I came to learn. While pondering what's next, I picked up a book by Mary Catherine Bateson, Composing a Further Life. She says, sometimes answering what's next means going back to what's been neglected. That applied to this journey. The essay goes on to explore what went before, my readings, discoveries, and reflections along the way, and then concludes like this. Conversion doesn't have a final destination. We do not suddenly change in essence, magically becoming new people with all our faults left behind, wrote Kathleen Norris in Amazing Grace. She describes conversion as a process, often subtle, a slow transformation. It takes time, says Father James Martin. Conversion happens most often in a slow, deliberate, and mysterious way, like a tree changing colors in the fall, and often you can't see the change in yourself. At the Easter Vigil, the journey I had been invited for ended when I was anointed with chrism oil and sealed by the gift of the Holy Spirit. But in another sense, that journey was part of a longer journey that had already begun, and Easter marked the beginning of another. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing these deeply, deeply personal stories with us today.
Thank you very much, Tilia, and congratulations to the winners who've read so far. Beautiful work. We will now go to Gail Wilson Kenna, who is the judge of the creative nonfiction category. Gail.
Okay, am I on? I'm not on.
talk.
Okay,
Yes.
am I on?
Yes, we see and hear you. Yes.
For 3 years, each December, it has been my pleasure to wander in diverse soul-making worlds while reading submissions to the creative nonfiction category of a unique and lasting literary competition. This year, I met Charles Schultz, Think Peanuts, survived a Northern California fire, traveled to Mongolia, worked at a radio station in West Virginia, and had my biased mind rotated on a firing range in Sparks, Nevada. I also walked in San Francisco from Market Street to the Haight-Ashbury, lugging a huge M&M cake for a son's birthday dinner in a trendy tasting restaurant, a soul-making journey if ever there was one. Today, writer Sheila Kogan of Kensington, the second place winner, is not reading her soulful narrative, Cake. But I congratulate Sheila and all the writers who sent entries to the creative nonfiction this year. I give each submission a slow, careful read, and most entries are read 2 to 3 times before I end up with 10 finalists. This year, I gave 5 honorable mentions, more than in past years. The pandemic seemed to have given writers more time and patience. If fewer submissions, many more of higher quality. I awarded honorable mentions to Christina Hogue of Santa Monica, Anne Simone of Lafayette, Jen Burke Anderson of San Francisco and outside California, Jessica Hodgman of Roswell, Georgia, and Frances Flavin of Sparks, Nevada. Today, Matthew Felix of San Francisco will read from his enchanting tale, awarded 3rd place, The Citrouet and the Pomegranate. And I don't know about Patricia right now, so I will just go ahead and say, this year's first place goes to writer Patricia Schultheis of Baltimore, Maryland, and her masterful narrative, In the Meantime, about Mr. Mort, Think Mortality, is the one I wish every serious writer could read. And I hope that we're going to come back to hers, and I know Matthew will read now. I would also just to say now, before Matthew reads, that I have heartfelt thanks always to Eileen Malone and to the remarkable Soul-Making Keats judges. So I look forward to hearing Matthew and hopefully something from Patricia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gail. Thank you to the competition, and thanks and congratulations to all the other winners. This is The Citrouet and the Pomegranate. And actually, I guess I'll just say relative to this piece that this is one where a bunch of disparate parts all come together at the very end. So I've chosen just to read the very beginning. I've traveled extensively, but you'd never know it from the looks of my apartment. Between an almost obsessive insistence on traveling light, never carrying more than one backpack, which always fits into any overhead bin, and a general aversion to accumulating things, I hardly ever bring back mementos from the road. That's what made my attraction to the pomegranates all the more peculiar. There were several of them in 3 different sizes, each in an irresistible flaming red that called to mind the poppy's licentious crimson. They caught my eye no sooner than I had entered my favorite shop on Istiklal Caddesi, a bustling pedestrian street that serves as Istanbul's commercial spinal cord. As I knew from my year-long stay 2 decades earlier, the store featured an intriguing variety of select books, fascinating old maps, and all manner of objects harkening back to the city's rich Ottoman past. The pomegranates, however, were the work of a contemporary artist, and even as I perused the rest of the store, again and again my gaze was drawn back to them. Perhaps it was that striking color, catching my eye like a torero's cape commanding the unwavering attention of a bull. Maybe the recollection of the pomegranate's divinely sweet nectar had set my taste buds aflame. Or it might have been the way the shiny enamel brought to life a fruit with such a glorious history, one reaching all the way back to antiquity. When the Greek goddess Persephone was tricked into consuming 6 pomegranate seeds, she was condemned to spend half of each year in the underworld. For the Egyptians, the fruit was a potent symbol of prosperity. Whatever it was, I wanted one. But what was I going to do with it? I was only 2 months into a 6-month trip that would take me to more than a dozen countries. How could I justify carrying around an object that was not only relatively heavy, but somewhat fragile? One that in the absence of a pile of papers to weigh down served no other purpose than to look pretty. Despite the unmistakable insistence I felt coming from somewhere deep inside, I just couldn't convince myself it made any sense. I left the store empty-handed. A couple of weeks later, it occurred to me that a book I'd seen in the shop on Istiklal Caddesi would make a perfect gift for one of my Turkish friends. I headed to the store, happy for a pretext to return. The book, after all, was only half the reason I was excited. What I was even more interested in were the pomegranates. Already, before I'd set foot in the store, they were calling to me again. Once there, I made a beeline for them. Taking into my hands the impeccable rendering of the illustrious fruit, I savored the feel of its cool surface, my fingertips gliding over the smooth enamel. I admired the lifelike form as I cradled it in my palm, enamored of its incomparable color. As though contemplating a potential lover I couldn't risk getting away a second time, everything in my being, except reason, resolutely up and up to it, as if taking a cue from the blossom that crowned it. I didn't merely want to buy the pomegranate. I was supposed to. So I did. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matthew. And Angie, are you able to read the excerpt for Patricia?
I am, and I am so sorry Patricia's not able to make it on our Zoom call. This excerpt is amazing, and I will certainly try to do it justice. Excerpt from In the Meantime by Patricia Schultheis. I looked up, and across my dining room table, a strange man sat. Who are you? You can call me Mort. What do you want? The question is, Pat, what do you want? I want my sister back. Mort ambled around the table and held out a pen. Pat, you know Sally can't ever come back. In the meantime, take the pen. What do you mean by meantime? You know meantime, Pat. Something happens. Meantime comes. Something else happens. And poof, meantime's over. I took the pen. I was 52 years old. I was growing up. My untwining from my older sister had taken decades. When Sally graduated from college and moved from Connecticut to Maryland, 3 years later, I settled 15 miles away and met the man I married. So there we were, my big sister and I, young brides, soon with 5 children under 5 between us. It was the 70s, and the drumbeat of militant feminism caught Sally's ear. She marched away from her marriage, moved to California, married again, and marched away from that marriage too. Meanwhile, I stayed in Maryland with Bill and our 2 boys. Flitting from one public relations job to another, I freelanced for local newspapers at night. Fiction, I thought. I'd get to fiction later. In my early 50s, I was still thinking that. Then came the Saturday afternoon Sally called. She had bad news. She had liver cancer. She had less than 3 months to live. At 2 a.m, Sally's 3rd husband, John, said, I love you, Sal. And somehow she managed to return his I love you. And Mort stepped out of the shadows. No words I have ever read, and certainly none I have ever written, have answered this question. How can someone not be? How can someone speak 3 words of love 1 minute and be forever silent the next? When bones fail, where does the mind abide? Does it wait in an ineffable somewhere? Or is this meantime all we have? Within the 4 years of Sally's death, my father, a friend, and a brother-in-law died, and Bill had his first bout of cancer. This life, I realized, was finite. I began to write fiction. I went to the Breadloaf Writers Conference and enrolled in the Johns Hopkins University's writing program. And 2 years after I graduated, Bill died. Writing saved me. The summer he died, I forced myself to get out of bed, go downstairs, and open my computer. All through the fall and winter and into spring, I worked on revising a mystery an agent was interested in. What would I have done without that? Disappearing into entropic misery was a distinct possibility. 8 months after the agent requested it, I sent my mystery off. The letters saying they weren't interested came a few days after the first anniversary of Bill's death. I was crushed, but remarkably breathing. I doubt that would have been the case had I not had to get to work. We all know that we live in a meantime between birth and death. But for the bereaved, death beats the tattoo of their hearts and sets the rhythm of their days. Isolated from those happy others outside grief's cocoon, they wander, searching for the one they lost and for their own lost selves. But along their rocky path, they may unearth gifts from Mort, a sorrow that grows into understanding, an understanding that ripens into wisdom. This is the realization at the root of many of my stories. And oh, the sudden wonder my characters may discover. After she loses her mother, Sarah opens a lingerie store. A star connects a witch to her stillborn child. Burdened but enlightened, my characters move forward. Writers create in secret, laying down their words in silence on the chance that years, even centuries later, someone may read them and silently have their firing synapses change their brains forever. It's a power akin to the sacred, one that humbles, even scares me. So why do I persist, especially when out-of-print books, much finer than mine, litter the literary marketplace's graveyard? Nor does the joy of one acceptance countermand the pain from dozens of rejections. The only answer I have is that I'm still discovering worlds I never knew my mind contained and inviting others to join me. Writing has been Mort's gift to me. And when he comes to reclaim his pen, I'll step away from my desk and perchance discover worlds more wondrous than any mere words can tell. Thank you so much to Patricia.
Thank you very much, Angie, for reading beautifully a piece that speaks to all writers, all of us. Thank you for rising to the occasion, Angie, and reading so well. Thank you to Gail Wilson-Kenna and her selections in that category of creative nonfiction. We will now move to Mary Mackey, who is the judge of the short story category. Welcome, Mary.
Thank you, Kathleen. This may have been a difficult year in many ways for all of us, but it's been a really wonderful year for short story writers. I think once again, being shut up by the pandemic, and that writing does in some ways save us. And I think that all writers have that feeling that we do have something to do besides just watch Netflix. So it's been an important part of my life, and I think many of yours too. This year I received many wonderful, well-written short stories. I'm going to read the honorable mentions first and then introduce my top prize winners who will read from their stories. The honorable mentions in the short story category are T.L. Sherwood, Francis M. Flavin, Joan Preblich, and Steve Wigenstein. Unfortunately, our first prize winner, Robert B. Robertson, whose winning story is A Vietnamese Farewell Letter, is not able to join us. This was a wonderful story, and I'm sorry he couldn't make it to read an excerpt to everyone. The third prize winner is Ellie Anderson, who will read from her story, One Night in Smelterville. Ellie?
Thank you so much for inviting me and doing this with me. This story, One Night in Smelterville, was originally published in the Capilano Review, which is put out by the Capilano College in Vancouver, Canada. It's in their number 43 issue in 1987. So I'm really pleased that I'm able to read this to you and that you recognize it as something worthwhile. So this is One Night in Smelterville. This story is told in 4 voices. So the first one is Lou. They drove into Smelterville on a Friday night. I watched them from a stool at the end of the bar. That great big man, a tall, leggy blonde with nice bazooms, and a delicate, dark-haired lady wearing a black hat. No one knew them. They sat in a booth, and the blonde told a story. They were too young for me. I liked them older, more experienced. not so likely to collapse and cry afterward. I turned back to my beer. This is Helen. I was surprised when Roger said he'd like to pick up his cousin. I'd been looking forward to going out with him and I thought we'd be alone. We drove to a small white house. Alicia, his cousin, stood in the doorway holding a baby and wearing a black hat that shaded her face. An older woman took the child, held the screen door open, and squinted at us. This is Roger. Alicia tried to turn the kid's face toward me. It was hard to look at them. Helen said, "What are you looking at?" I wanted to say my whole life. Leisha said something into the dark of the house, and her mother appeared at the door. After our mothers found out Leisha was pregnant, they cried for a month. I couldn't stand to see my own mother hunched over and miserable because of something I'd done. Leisha is my first cousin. The family was furious when they found out we'd made a baby together. I promised I'd stop seeing Leisha, but there's too much pressure around here. I thought we'd do all right, someplace where nobody knew us. We could go to New Orleans, Leisha said, all excited. She always talked about going there, Mardi Gras. Wrought iron railings on big white houses. Leisha liked to wear sequins and black lipstick. She'd fit right in. I don't care where I live, just so it doesn't take too much energy. We did stop seeing each other for a while. I nailed baseboards in condominiums for 12 hours a day, trying to keep from thinking about it. I smoked pot, took speed, and ate Tums to get through. At night, my thoughts echoed like the sound of a chair scraping across the floor in an empty room. Nobody told me when the kid was born. It seemed like someone should have mentioned it. I was eating my lunch on a patch of grass out at the project when I read it in the Herald. It was like catching a 2x4 between the eyes. I went to the hospital because I figured I might never see the kid otherwise. She looked strange through the green glass of the nursery. She didn't cry or move. I asked the nurse if the baby was okay. "You fathers are all alike," she said, but she leaned over the baby for a moment, as if she were listening for the baby's breathing. That's the excerpt. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that stunning story. Our second prize winner is Andrea Hansel, who will read from her story, Dia de los Muertos. Andrea.
Hi.
Hi, good to meet you.
Nice to meet you too, thank you. I'll be reading the ending of my story, Dia de los Muertos, which is about the relationship between Gloria, a young dining room aide in a dementia unit, and Dr. McCabe, a mute elderly patient on the unit who was once a science professor. In the first part of the story, we meet the patients at Gloria's table and watch them succumb one by one to a flu that sweeps through the unit. Dr. McCabe is now bedbound and no longer comes to the dining room. The days lengthened and baby green leaves appeared on the trees. Gloria found that she took less interest in the people at her new table than she had in her first group. She could see that over time, the patients at Gulf Breezes would become a blur of names and faces moving quickly through her life on their journey to the grave. On her way into work, she stopped to find things to show Dr. McCabe: a magnolia flower, a tiny bird's egg, a rock worn smooth by the gentle waves of the Gulf. She began to look forward to her sunlit morning moments with him, peaceful times when his wife hadn't arrived yet and the staff were busy with the other patients in the day room. "Look what I found for you," she'd say, and Dr. McCabe would smile, kiss her hand, turn the rock or the egg or the flower in his shaking fingers, examine it, sniff it. She felt as though she was seeing the objects through his eyes, the uniqueness of them, how the polished rocks sparkled in the summer morning light, how the flower petals formed a pattern, petals within petals within petals. She had the thought that she was his last student in a classroom without words. In early September, she came to show Dr. McCabe a fuzzy caterpillar and saw a screen drawn around his bed. His visiting grown-up children huddled with the hospice nurse, while his wife grimly arranged flowers in a vase. She set the caterpillar down in the courtyard, imagining how it would have made him smile, how he would have stroked it with the index finger of his good hand. The next time she stopped by Dr. McCabe's room, Gloria saw a new patient in the bed and another memorial notice on the bulletin board. She cried quietly in the hallway and wished Mrs. McCabe had thought to ask her to the funeral. Dia de los Muertos came around again, and Gloria carried marigolds and chocolate cake to the cemetery for Tia Josefina. At home, she helped Mariana decorate their family's altar, and she lit a scented candle for her aunt. Then she lit extra candles for Dr. McCabe, for Mrs. Atwood, for all the flickering souls she had met and would yet meet as they burned down toward their inevitable ends. She hoped that someday, somewhere, someone would light a candle for her too. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrea, for your wonderful story. It was very touching. The pleasure of reading stories by talented writers like Ellie and Andrea is one of the reasons I keep judging this contest year after year. It's a wonderful way to spend December, and it's my sort of my Christmas gift every year. So thank you, all of you, for writing such wonderful things, all of you in every category.
Many thanks, Mary. And now we will move on to Linda Joy Myers, who is the judge of the memoir vignette category.
Hi, everybody. I'm so glad we can do this on Zoom. It's fantastic to see everyone. And thank you, Eileen, for all you do and for the group that made all this happen. Really appreciate that. As Mary said, I also got a lot of interesting and inspiring work in the mail just before Christmas. And I love memoir. I've been teaching it for many, many years. And the thing that makes it special is that I'm looking for these moments that shape us, make us into who we are, and deliver a sense of that awakening experience to the reader. And a lot of the works, of course, do that. So I had to come and boil it down to a few winners. So the honorable mentions are Sarah Etkin Baker, Jan Mills, and Robert B. Robeson. And I'm really pleased. I think all the winners are here today, so I'm really thrilled about that. So third prize goes to Alona Duncan for The Little Crapaud. I don't know quite how to say it. If it's wrong, she'll correct me in a minute. It's a story of drama and conflict in an ordinary life that unfolds with some mystery, and it's resonant with history and music and delight. So I look forward to hearing Alona read her story.
Hello, everyone. I'll be reading the beginning of my story about my piano that moved with me from France to Florida and finally to Virginia. 30 years ago, living in Toulouse, France, I saw a small baby grand piano, in French, a crapaud, on display at a music store and felt a mysterious attraction. I entered. The store's owner, Monsieur G, opened the piano's fallboard to the ivory and ebony keys. "Un gavotte," he said, ceremoniously pointing to the inlaid lettering above the keyboard. He asked if I was a pianist. I said I was, played a few chords, liked the sound. The piano dated from 1917. Monsieur G inferred that Gabriel Fauré had once been its owner. Somewhere there was a photo of the composer seated at the gavotte. He quoted a fair price and I offered to buy the instrument. Monsieur G said he would check with the current owners. Could I return in a day or two? Bien sûr, I said, to be polite, yet wondered what was there to check, Did he think I was unsuitable? 2 days later, Monsieur G asked about my background. I said that I loved music, was an American temporarily in Toulouse, and would take the piano with me to the United States. Monsieur G frowned. C'est compliqué. What was complicated, I thought. I learned that the owners, les deux messieurs, were fond of the instrument and might not want it moved far away. Decades earlier, it had been their daughter, a promising virtuoso who died young. In her memory, they kept the gavotte. I expressed regret, said my 11-year-old daughter Natasha would be playing the piano. A smile graced Monsieur G's face. Yet once again, I was told to return. Walking home, I began to think that buying this piano was akin to adopting a child. The third time I visited Monsieur G, his initial question surprised me. Would I paint the piano white? I laughed. Comme Liberace? He nodded knowingly. I assured him that wouldn't happen. Then with a stern expression, Monsieur G said the gavotte was more than a piece of furniture. The instrument spoke, vibrated, needed devoted care. Gently, I passed my hands along the piano's casing, promised to care for it and have it expertly restored. Still not convinced of my worthiness, he asked for references. I mentioned my organ teacher and friend, Madame Darras, and her son Xavier, the renowned composer organist. His face lit up. This news would please les deux messieurs. The capo was finally mine. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Delightful story. All right, so I'm really happy that Ella Rain Lockie is here to read her Soul on a Small Town Saturday Night story. Well, this story took me to a place that I'd never been with humor, and the voice really kept me reading to find out what delightful thing would happen next. Elaine?
Okay. I'm going to read a series of excerpts from this instead of a section of the piece. Sold on a small town Saturday night. Charity events have always been one of the big reasons that small Western towns stay alive. Saturday's event on Main Street in my Montana hometown to raise money for a children's playground was a perfect example. Preparations began on Friday night, where I learned I'm no real Montana woman anymore after living in California for 30 years. That became clear when I was helping the local ladies, 6 of them, with the big fruit and salad cut up. Enough for about 500, I figured. I did my share. I can wield a knife with the best of them. Except while they did it, they entertained by carving up about everyone in town along with the fruits and vegetables. They could all be cut-ups themselves on the Tonight Show. The very loud rock band called Voodoo Cadillac, how much more un-Montana could it be, started playing at 5 o'clock on the street. A fireman's fashion show preceded the culinary auction. The highlight was Stinky as a model. He's the local pilot whom my daughters hired one year to fly me in his open 2-seater plane over the Bear Paw Mountain foothills and what used to be my family's homestead section. The plane looked just like the one in Out of Africa, but my pilot was named Stinky instead of Robert Redford. The culinary auction is where most of the money was raised. 40 donations of homemade foodstuffs from outstanding country cooks. Well, all food except for a donor who admitted not knowing what culinary meant and sent some kind of horse gear. Of course, by auction time, there were many drinks and drunks. Lots of come-ons. The best one went like this.
A brazen young cowboy walked up to me and said, "How come I don't know you?" I said, "Probably because I went to school with your mother." It didn't deter him. I finally said, "You're stepping on my toes." To which he said, "I know, and they're bare." "Not bad," says I, not telling him it was damn good. "But get out of here." Then it was out to listen and dance to the band, which by this time I was starting to love after all the bad wine. About midnight, the wind decided to kick up a dust storm, a real Montana one. A serious poker game ensued in Pep's. Then there was bar hopping between the 3 bars. I refused to let any man buy me a drink, though. Some things remain the same in small towns and big cities. I wobbled to the cabin around 3 a.m. and was still chewing sand 12 hours later when I left to fly back to California. Thank you.
Thank you too. Delightful story. All right, I'm really happy to introduce Anne Simone for her story, Seeking the Center. I was blown away by this story, the sensual painting of a world, and where an outer world and an inner world were united. Thank you so much, Anne.
Thanks so much. This is an excerpt from my piece, Seeking the Center, which takes place in Morocco. A heavy hand-forged compass and ruler lay on the front table. These are the tools we use to find the center, the most important instruments of craftsmanship. The speaker was Hamza El Fasiki, a renowned metalworker in the crafts community of Fez, Morocco. Along with 10 travel mates, I'd squeezed onto a wood bench in his cramped artist studio. The walls were lined with handmade tools, shears, saws, hammers, mallets. But I was most intrigued by 6 notebook pages taped to the wall, geometric compass drawings of exquisite Jalise tiles, like those found in buildings all over North Africa. The center of each page was hypnotic, like a candle drawing me to another plane. The geometric patterns are ancient, Hamza told us. He talked about sacred geometry, the idea that geometric shapes can have spiritual meaning. In all Islamic art, there is a center, he said. The center represents tawaf, the Islamic rite of pilgrimage. As he talked, I focused on the drawings, both in wonder and in frustration. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something deeper here, something I couldn't quite grasp. In the ancient Fez Medina, some 80,000 people roost in a Gothic warren of shops, houses, mosques, and guest houses called riads. It's dense, chaotic, colorful, and alive, and almost impossible to navigate. With brain damage from a stroke I'd suffered years earlier, I knew I'd have trouble. I planned to stick close by my travel mates. But when I returned to our riad after the morning with Hamza, I was surprised to find it deserted. Disappointed, I climbed to my 4th floor room with the green and turquoise Jalise stars, so like Hamza's drawings. A hand-tooled lantern cast a dim, burnt orange glow. A breeze caught the lace curtains through the open window. It would be so easy to burrow into this cozy niche for the rest of the day. Looking at the geometric tiles in my room, I wondered, what does it mean to find the center? Does the center represent perfection?
the struggle to be our best selves? Does the center hold our deepest truth, our fears? I didn't have any answers, but I knew that hiding out in my room was not my style. I would venture out and find my own way from the riad to the markets. And that's when the real adventure began. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Thank you, Anne, and thank everyone. Look forward to the stories next year.
Terrific readings, everyone. Wow, this has just been such a great afternoon, and there's more to come. We have a couple more categories. Our next category is the novel excerpt, and we will start by hearing from the judge, Donna Gillespie.
Okay, I was just in awe of the talent I saw here. There wasn't a single entry that wasn't special in some way. So much polish, and I saw the hard work, and so many of them showed a sharp understanding of novel structure and how to develop an opening crisis along with the environment. I was just really impressed with these kinds of details. And I read these entries over my COVID Christmas, which would have been really grim, except for being able to spend time in other people's heads and enjoy their imaginations. It was really wonderful. And also it was really incredibly difficult to choose among them. There were razor thin margins here, and I kind of felt bad about that, but everyone here has something, and I just hope they all keep on writing. And I'll read the honorable mentions, and then I'll say a little bit of something about why I picked the first, second, and third. Okay, the honorable mentions in alphabetical order are Karima Alavi, Susan Axtman, Matthias de Villiers, Francis M. Flavin, oh, that name's come up a lot, Christina A. Hogue, and Sarah Collins Hollenberger. And then I wanted to say a little something about our third prize winner, which is Sandra K. Cruz for her novel That Which Remains. And I love this. It was kind of in my mind, a dystopian sci-fi that zooms right in on a tragic and desperate situation and takes on huge issues in our culture today. And it was written with such beautiful conciseness, which is kind of what those were the things that attracted me. And our second prize winner, Ilana DeBar, for Shaken Loose, I hope I pronounced the name right. I think of it as a modern fantasy adventure. There was such a wide range of styles here. And I loved it for its crazy creativity, unexpected characters, how it satirizes our beliefs, and just its sheer adventurousness. And then our first prize winner is J.K. Tolman, for The Compromise, an American novel. And this just struck me as one that did everything right. It plunged you immediately into a particular obscure time in the past and everything in the writing seemed to flow together, the customs, the environment, the dreams, and it had this intimate feeling for the landscape and perfect pitch for the voices of the time, I thought. And it opens with a monumental problem. That's one of my things. Okay, so now first I'd like to introduce Sandra J. Cruz, who's going to read to us from That Which Remains.
Thank you so much, Donna. And thank you to everyone who makes this competition happen every year. I actually selected a piece to read from the middle of my novel instead of beginning. It was on the lonely stone that Kate and Max first met, above the earth and her mortals, on heights befitting gods. Positioned on the northwest coast of Andros, it had obliged as the pylon of a massive bridge connecting the mainland to this small but important island military base until obliterated in the bombings of the truth campaigns. Its first life, however, proved a brief pedestrian prelude to its second, more illustrious life as an accidental but apt post-war monument. For some, it served as an abstract testament to the devastation of war, For others, a reminder of the losses they personally had suffered. For still others, an omen of things yet to come. For most, it was simply phallic. Nightly bonfires and fleshy mirages gave way to a morning vista of broken bottles and misplaced clothing strewn amongst the dusty gray ruins. An ever-changing mural of graffiti slicked the base of the Lonely Stone, ending around the 30-foot mark. No one else dared scale its full soaring height. Too many had died trying. It was because of the Lonely Stone that Cade took on his mythological status. Some claimed they saw him fly to the top of it, while others claimed they had been healed just by touching it. One night, a tattooed, red-headed woman, eyes rolling and body convulsing, declared him a god. And from that night onward, a drum circle formed around the base of the Lonely Stone, and a nightly bacchanalia ensued, with raptures dancing and ecstatic chanting. No one was clear on which god Cade was, though the more intoxicated people became, the more intensely the debate raged. Some dared to suggest he might only be a demigod, but none disputed his Olympian heritage. And after all that time on the island, he certainly looked the part, magnificent and fierce, his brown skin glistening in the sun, his dark hair braided down his back, his long beard braided down the front, his intense green eyes fixed in a penetrating gaze. A diet of fish and seaweed and a routine of climbing and hiking had sculpted his form, honing his perfect build. Picture him standing there, staff in hand at the edge of a massive rock jutting out into the sea. The water sprays over him as it crashes emerald and cold against the rubble. White foam edges in toward him, then rolls back off the slab in deprecating increments. A pelican sleeps on the last post of a rotting pier, and a small flock of gulls follows the last boat of departing revelers, which Cade watches as it shrinks toward the horizon. They are so young, teenagers, 20-somethings, a generation steeped in apocalypticism. Was it possible to come back from that? Was it necessary, desirable? Cade half suspects they have found the secret, discovered the key buried in the wasteland, because when they are there, he feels caught up, enlivened, animated by a primal energy that defies the hegemony of death. But when they leave, the malaise slinks back in, the stagnant, stinking bog, the lifeless realm of the dead. He wonders now, peering into the morning sun, searching for boats no longer visible, if he is in fact dead, if this is hell. The acolytes declared no such doctrine, but he's read Dante, he's studied Faust, he's analyzed the plays of Beckett and Sartre, and alone on the shore with no one to ask or to touch, with the sun glinting off the water and blinding him, and the sound of the waves rolling and breaking in hypnotic cadence, the unrelenting desolation of the island, and the solitude of his being reaching fever pitch, it seems entirely possible that he is, in fact, in hell. But then the pelican lifts its wings and takes flight. It flaps upward, stretches its improbable beak and soars over the rolling sea, silhouetted in a soft pink sky. And Cade begins to doubt, could anything so oddly beautiful exist in hell? Wouldn't the realm of the lost dead more likely consist of strip malls and fast food franchises, drinks made of colored corn syrup and packaged in disposable plastic bottles, huge ads for products no one needs but everyone feels like a failure for not owning? Gulls might linger, duped by the vast parking lots and shopping plaza rooftops into thinking they'd found water. They might swipe at customers, hover about the trash, but there would be no pelicans, not a single ridiculous scooping mouth. Cade is sure of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, our second prize winner is Alana DeBar, and she's going to read to us from Shaken Loose.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank everyone involved with the contest. It's wonderful to be part of this with the other readers. The small, slight-boned devil scrabbled her fingers through a pile of mining debris. She wasn't strong enough to swing a heavy iron mallet or jimmy open any cracks in the rock wall, so she crouched on the ground and picked through rubble. No one was there to see, so it wasn't too humiliating. Black dust welled up where she dug. A hot, dry breeze grazed the cliffs, but didn't bother descending to the canyon floor. The only sounds were the scrape of gravel and the occasional flap of her wings for balance. There, beneath a pile of dusty black shards, was that a glint of ruby? Or there, wedged between two chunks of black rock, a shimmer of amethyst? Hunting for gemstones felt unsettlingly familiar. Baphomet's fingers slipped with ease into remembered motions of sifting and plucking. Back then, eons ago, they had plucked flowers for heavenly garlands, creamy tea roses and airy baby's breath and delicate Queen Anne's lace, all silvery white, all holy, all perfect. Her hands twitched at the memory, scattering gravel across the dusty ground. Baphomet hated those perfect flowers. She hated everything about God and heaven. Above all, she hated what had happened to Satan. But perhaps the gemstones would help. If she gathered enough, she could figure out how to make them into a crown or scepter. The master metalsmiths had fled long ago with the rest of the court, and she had no smelting tools, but she would find a way. A glistening new crown might remind him of his destiny. It might revive him. And she would be the one who provided it. She'd be the one he would thank and honor with that dazzling, caressing smile. Baphomet's shoulders ached from hunching in the dirt for so long. She had been created to soar, not crouch. Disappointment sifted through her with the last pile of rubble. She'd found no rubies, no amethysts, not even any thin veins of quartz hiding within rocks. The mining brigades had been thorough, or perhaps other scavengers had picked through the leftovers long ago. She pulled her wings together and stood up. Black dust coated her hands, but the rest of her body and tunic was a tarnished brown, its original silver reduced to a few glints here and there. She'd try another mine later. Right now she felt an anxious, possessive need to return to the palace. 3 wing pumps took her up over the abandoned mine and its cliffs. She flapped across a black mesa, desolate as the rest of hell, and crossed a brilliant orange fire river that fed into a vast fire lake. The scope of this world had once amazed her. Deserts stretching further than she could fly, and oceans as bright as molten gold. All theirs, to rule as they liked. This place was a prize, not a punishment. Satan had told them that. But over time, the grandeur became routine. And now she barely registered the dancing tendrils of flame over the orange seas, or the thrashing and wailing of the puny human souls within.
Okay. And now J.K. Tolman will read from The Compromise, an American novel, our first prize winner.
So thank you to Donna Gillespie for giving me this opportunity to read. I'm J.K. Tolman, and I'm nearing the completion of an historical novel called The Compromise. It's set in a border state in 1840s. It's about a mixed race family that tries to stay together against the social forces that threatens to pull them apart. They are half siblings, so they have the same father, different mothers. Goat whiskers on my face. The wood creaked under heavy boots on the front porch. Who goes there? I threw off the blankets. This woke my sister and sent our nanny goat skittering. I took 2 steps and drew the hunting knife I always kept by the door. Mariah, it's me, your brother, Otis. Otis. I let myself breathe, sheathed the knife, and felt for the latch. Come in, out of the cold. Is Pa with you? No. I could see his outline under a streak of stars. My brother ducked when he entered the cabin doorway. Did you bring Mother back? Asked Eliza in her little girl voice. No, just me. Why'd you come, Otis? I asked. There was no answer. He let the goat smell his hand, and she returned to her bed of straw. My sister slipped out of bed. Why'd you come in the dark of night after being gone so long? You scared us. All I can see is the whites of your eyes and the buttons on your coat. Sorry, Lizzie. I've been riding by moonlight and leading a second horse. I'm done in. He took a deep breath. I've come to take the 2 of you out of Stoneville to start up elsewhere. Eliza asked. Where's elsewhere? Jefferson City with Pa? No, got you working in Columbia with me. Is Pa living? I asked. Alive and well. I'll help you take your boots off, I said. Other things can wait. You best get some sleep. I offered our horsehair bed. Your feet are gonna hang off the end. He stretched out. It's good to be back home. After a long sigh, he dropped off. Eliza and I curled up on the floor as we had when our parents were here. We tucked up under our woolen nightgowns on the bare rug. With sheepskins over us, it was warm enough, but my heart was pounding too fast to sleep. Where's he taking us? Whispered Eliza. You heard him. Why's he taking us there? Work. Now go back to sleep. But Mother might come back. I know. Eliza and I had never been away from our cabin in Stoneville more than a day's walk. We'd heard stories of railroads and boats that filled the air with smoke and went so fast they made you feel like flying on the wind, and buildings as tall as trees clustered in cities that looked like clouds, but were stone hard. You could go inside, walk for miles, turn around and come back out into the air. I was bursting because all those things I wanted to see and do were crowding in and trying to make their way around the unknowns. The first unknown was about becoming women. This meant getting husbands and starting families, and there was no choice as far as I knew. The time was drawing near because I was 16. And the other unknown was that if Mother returned, we would not be here, and that could mean never seeing her again. I could hear Otis breathing and twitching in his sleep. Pa sent him to fetch us, so our lives as women were beginning. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you very much to Donna and to the winners of the novel excerpt category. We've come to our last category for our afternoon together. I have to tip my hat to Eileen Malone, our contest founder and director, because for all the years that she would preside over the awards event at the Corrette Auditorium, she always had the humor category last. Her theory, and I think it's a great theory, which is we want to leave a wonderful day of listening to readings. We want to leave on a light note and feel buoyant as we go about the rest of our days. So thank you to Eileen for brilliant programming over the years. And thank you again to our co-chairs, Ellen Woods and Angie Minkin, for organizing, for being in communication with all of you, for curating, putting together the order of today's events. You did a brilliant job, both of you. Unfortunately, the judge of the humor category is Sue Granzella, and unfortunately, Sue is not able to be with us today. Sue is a 4th grade teacher who's been teaching online and transitioning to being back in the classroom, and she is very, very, very busy teaching 4th graders, and she is with us in spirit. So what I would like to do is say the names of the honorable mentions in the humor category, and then I'll say the names of the 3rd, 2nd, and 1st prize winners. The honorable mentions in humor are Matthew Felix, Victor Lusek, Robin Michel, Greg Wrench, David Stewart, and Sharon Wood Wortman. Congratulations to those honorable mention folks. And we have all of our prize winning people in humor with us. We will first hear our 3rd prize winner, Matthew Felix, for A Turkish Bath in Morocco. Matthew.
Thank you. I don't know how light this one is, but since there are 2 more after this, hopefully we'll still end on a light note. But yeah, this is A Turkish Bath in Morocco. When I discovered a hammam not far from my hotel, I didn't give it a second thought. I was going to a Turkish bath in Morocco. A subdued peace and quiet of the sort usually reserved for places of worship reigned over a small lobby, a dimly lit, self-contained world. On the other side of the room, an old man sat behind a simple desk. Once I was ready, the man ushered me through a door to his right. It was as if I'd unknowingly made the descent to a lower level of the edifice, a tenebrous netherworld where the walls, floor, and ceiling were all made of the same gray stone. I was now alone, uneasy like someone arriving at a haunted house in the middle of nowhere, only to find the door closed behind them. In this case, however, I was standing in the darkness, wearing a bathing suit and flip-flops, and holding a silly plastic pail I could have been using to build sandcastles. Everything felt a little off. An enormous older man emerged out of nowhere. Like me, he carried a bucket. Unlike me, he wore an obscenely small, dingy pair of underwear that clung precariously to his sweaty buttocks and groin. "Massage?" he asked, with what seemed like a mischievous grin. Yeah, I hesitated, my eyes darting in all directions in the hopes of finding a quick way out. Instead, I obediently followed my captor deeper into the darkness. The man seemed to gesture for me to get on the floor. I knew that couldn't be right. He again pointed to the floor, more commandingly this time. Not only could it be right, but it was. He wanted me on my knees. No sooner had he finished scouring my upper body and arms than I had the surreal impression the man was making another, even more bizarre request. Rather than merely kneel on the floor, he seemed to be asking me to lie down on it. Now, I'm not even remotely a germaphobe. I'll drink from friends' cups. I never bother to put antiseptic on cuts. And I am an unapologetic, lifelong adherent to the 3-second rule. But this wasn't just any floor. This was a grimy, slimy floor. This was a floor rising up from which I was almost certain I could hear the mating calls and battle cries of countless unknown strains of bacteria and fungi that were sure to colonize each and every crevice of my body. Before I could protest, the giant had pushed me to the floor. What was to come involved not only scalding water, but a new rag that may as well have been made of steel wool. Between the blistering temperature of the water and the stinging fibers of the rag, I wasn't sure what hurt more. While I gave it some thought, the giant made his way up my body, beginning with the legs, deferentially bypassing the family jewels, and proceeding up my torso. Once he got to my shoulders, he extended each of my arms as if he were also about to crucify me. Truth be told, it probably would have felt better than what followed. As though letting out a lifetime of anger to which he'd never given voice, his massive gut mere inches from my face, he scrubbed my helpless body with a relentless fury. I closed my eyes and shut my mouth as a salty shower of sweat rained down on me, holding my breath. It was agonizing, and I wasn't sure it was ever going to end. Thank you.
Bravo, Matthew.
Thank you.
Second prize in humor goes to Jane Timms for her piece, Morning Prayer.
Thanks to all of you. In this excerpt, our narrator is late to church and has to sit on the front row of the balcony. She cannot see over the rail. And as we pray this morning, let us join hands in the spirit of Christian fellowship. She hates the germy, invasive hand-holding, but complies. She didn't crawl over anyone on her way in, so her left hand is safe. She looks to her right and sinks. Who is that? She's never seen him in all her years at this church. Maybe he always sits on the front row of the balcony. He's tall enough to see over the rail. He's leaning toward her, leaning across the abyss where 300 or 100 people could be sitting if they wanted cricks in their necks or weren't prone to seasickness. He's reaching for her hand. She leans toward him, extends, connects. Testing, she runs the thumb of her free hand over her fingertips. Oh God, she has church hands, a Sunday disease that, regardless of the amount of lotion used in prevention, strikes just as she is about to reach out for the hand of the neighbor in prayer. Church hands, dry, scratchy winter church hands. This gorgeous man who unwittingly winds up holding her hand because he can see over the rail and she is front row late. This unknown churchgoer must think she is the scratchiest woman in Christendom. Holding his hand is like sinking into a big satin pillow. That first glance was a photograph. He is outdoorsy, scrubbed, but appealingly rugged, wearing rust corduroy trousers and casual woodsy shoes. His head is a mass of curls. She missed the eyes, blue or brown. He'd be smashing with either. He probably hated those curls as a kid. His hands are soft. He must wear gloves when he chops wood. Gloves are what she should have worn. Lots of good they do stuffed in her coat pocket. One more squirt of lotion might have done it. She probably should carry one of those little bottles in her purse. Is she leaning too far, putting too much weight into his hand? Her hand surely is heavy in his. Her hand is a rough, scratchy brick. Why didn't that heathen husband of hers come to church so she wouldn't be sitting here holding this total stranger's velvet hand, wondering about his eyes? She should have stayed home. That late switch to B&B was costly. The liqueurs always get her. Her head pounds, and she thinks she must think about something else. His hand is on the bottom. Even with the purse-sized lotion, she couldn't have maneuvered in time for the prayer. What was she supposed to do? Holler down to the preacher to wait just a second so she could dab lotion onto her church hands? And then to be polite, wouldn't she have had to offer a squirt to the woodsman? He doesn't need it. He has great hands. Thank you.
Terrific, terrific. Thank you, Jane. And we're going to finish our reading for the afternoon with Matthew Felix again, who's won multiple prizes. So take it away, Matthew.
Thank you. And I just want to say I was laughing out loud at Jane's piece. So thank you, Jane, for that. And I hope you find, an appropriate lotion that kind of addresses that issue. And I also, before I start, I just want to dedicate this last piece because this last piece is really appropriate. I want to dedicate this last piece to all of us who have, I can't say all of us, all of you who have spent 2 hours without necessarily getting up to go to the bathroom. This one is for you. Thank you. This is called Let It Flow. The bus pulled out of the station and the trip got underway. The trip to Eskişehir was about a 4-hour one. Between the summer heat at the terminal, or because of the summer heat, at the terminal, I drank a lot of water. I'd been conscious not to overdo it since I was about to get on a long distance bus, but there was never any chance I'd make it the entire trip without going to the bathroom. Drop by drop, like sands in an hourglass, fluid trickled from my kidneys to my bladder. At first, it wasn't that bad. As more and more scenery rolled by, however, a pressure began to build on my insides. I really had to go. There wasn't a toilet on the bus. I crossed my legs a little tighter, trying not to think about it. A half hour later, we were still in the middle of nowhere. Meanwhile, pressure had turned to pain. Surely we'd be at a rest stop shortly. We had to be. But that wasn't the point. The point was I had to go. Now. I looked around. The bus wasn't very full. The seats on the other side of the aisle were unoccupied. I looked at my empty water bottle. I reached for my jacket and spread it over my lap. Was I really going to do this? More importantly, could I really do this? Never mind the logistics. What about the sound? My internal organs now on the verge of failure. I gave it a go. I didn't have enough hands. I got the bottle into what felt like the right position, but I struggled to keep the opening of my flaccid manhood aligned with it. My jacket posed a real problem too. It kept getting in the way. Challenges notwithstanding, I still had to pee. I took a deep breath. I willed the floodgates to open. Apparently they were on lockdown. Never in my life had I needed to urinate so badly, and yet nothing came out. I started to panic. I had to think about flushing toilets and cascading waterfalls and dams breaking. Without warning, the bus slowed and jerked to the side. A rest stop. My bladder may have just refused to let out so much as a drop, but my eyes were suddenly moist with tears. Tears of joy. Tears that, oddly enough, smelled of the asparagus I'd eaten the night before. The bus hadn't even come to a halt before I was on my feet. That's when I learned I could barely walk. I hobbled down the stairs in agony, incapacitated like a frail 90-year-old man. Finally, a couple of minutes later, in a dark, dirty stall at an anonymous roadside stop in Western Anatolia, I had the most satisfying, mind-blowing gusher of piss my body has ever known. The force was like the kickback of a revolver. The mighty stream flowed on and on and on. Then it flowed some more. Pressure had given way to unbearable pain. Pain now gave way to delirious pleasure. I had experienced less satisfying orgasms. At times, I feared being on the verge of one now. Having peed out half my body weight, I shuffled back to the bus. Whereas ordinarily, I would have grabbed something to drink for the second leg of the trip, this time I didn't even so much as glance at the mini mart, never mind set foot in it. I wasn't thirsty. Thank you.
Bravo, bravo, bravo to Matthew, bravo to every single writer who has read this afternoon. What a wonderful gathering of beautiful writing. Thank you, everyone. I think we're going to stop our recording about now, and I welcome everyone to stay a few minutes before we rush off to the bathrooms.